Canyon del Oro ambush 1870s. Apache warriors attack Kennedy's wagon train. Apache ambush Kennedy in Israel. Many dead, women and children. The blood-caked Mexican stumbled into Camp Grant, clothes in tatters, his naked body revealing wounds that matched the horror in his eyes. Within minutes, Sergeants Warfield and Mott had assembled a mounted rescue party without waiting for orders. The man had described 30 settlers, including women and children, ambushed by as many as 50 Apache warriors. As the soldiers raced toward Canyon del Oro, they couldn't know they were riding toward a scene of carnage that would haunt the Arizona Territory for years to come. The calm before the storm. This violence erupted from what had appeared to be a period of relative calm at Camp Grant. In the weeks prior, the military outpost had received a series of unusual visitors that reflected the complex reality of frontier relations. A native woman arrived one morning with her nose severed, punishment inflicted by her husband. This brutal practice persisted among certain tribal groups until General Crook's interventions established more consistent legal standards across the territory. The incident illustrated how tribal justice systems operated with their own internal logic, often harsh by American standards but consistent within their cultural framework. Another day brought an elderly woman leading a younger woman and a snake-bitten boy to the camp. They sought white man's medicine after tribal healers had failed to treat the venom. The camp physician administered anti-venom, while the soldiers observed the cultural significance of this medical exchange. Native healers excelled with certain herbal remedies, but lacked effective treatments for snake bites, creating a pragmatic reason for cross-cultural medical cooperation. Perhaps most telling was the arrival of an aging warrior who approached the camp with his hands raised in surrender. "I have no strength left to walk the war path," he told the interpreter. He expressed genuine curiosity about peaceful coexistence between whites and natives while examining simple items like matches with fascination. The man spent hours watching soldiers light fires without flint, a technological gap that revealed how even basic innovations created power imbalances on the frontier. Daily life at Camp Grant maintained a delicate equilibrium. Tribal members detained at the camp rarely attempted escape and received relatively humane treatment by the standards of the era. The military leadership recognized that harsh conditions would only fuel further hostility. Occasional messengers arrived from Camp Apache with news and communications, creating a tenuous network between military installations. These messengers from Camp Apache presented a striking visual contrast to the uniformed soldiers. They wore muslin loincloths, moccasins, and eagle feather headdresses. Their weapons, spears, bows with arrows, and rawhide shields spoke to traditional combat methods that remained effective in the rugged terrain. Some carried musical instruments crafted from gourds and playing cards made from horsehide, demonstrating how Apache culture adapted materials from their environment for both practical and recreational purposes. The camp relied heavily on tame Apaches and Mexicans captured as children who had grown up among the tribes. These individuals navigated both worlds with unique cultural fluency, serving as interpreters and guides. Their existence represented the blurred lines between cultural identities in the borderlands, where captivity, adoption, and assimilation created complex loyalties. When the post-trader received new merchandise, it signaled the approaching payday for soldiers. Two assistants managed the store, Paul and Speedy. Paul possessed remarkable carpentry skills, but struggled with alcohol, his craftsmanship deteriorating with each empty bottle. His talents illustrated how frontier settlements wasted potential through inadequate support for those battling addiction. Speedy lived up to his nickname, quick in movement, speech, and thought. An accomplished runner and swimmer, he combined business acumen with surprising social grace. He once operated a pawn shop in Tucson before relocating to Camp Grant. Speedy maintained a curious belief in ghosts and supernatural phenomena, often sharing elaborate stories that entertained the soldiers. His assistance proved invaluable during archaeological excavations near the camp, where his knowledge of native artifacts helped identify significant findings. The atmosphere at Camp Grant transformed noticeably after payday. Soldiers with pockets full of wages engaged in gambling, drinking, and occasional minor infractions. Military discipline relaxed temporarily as men sought relief from frontier monotony. These cycles of payment and indulgence created predictable patterns of behavior that camp leadership monitored but tolerated within limits. This fragile peace at Camp Grant represented the complex reality of Arizona Territory in this era, moments of cultural exchange and cooperation interrupted by sudden violence. The Apache ambush that sent soldiers racing toward Canyon del Oro would shatter this equilibrium and reveal how quickly frontier relations could deteriorate into bloodshed. Dire news and immediate response. The Mexican man, now identified as Domingo, provided a detailed account of the ambush between labored breaths as soldiers gathered around him. The caravan had proceeded without suspicion up the slope leading to a long mesa near Canyon del Oro. Their guard was down, a fatal mistake in Apache territory. According to Domingo, Apache warriors suddenly emerged from 3 directions, surrounding the travelers in a tactical maneuver that demonstrated their superior knowledge of the terrain. "We had no warning," Domingo explained, his voice breaking. "The Americans and Mexicans fought to give the women and children time to reach safer ground." He confirmed that Kennedy and Israel had been killed in the initial attack. Many others sustained injuries, including Domingo himself, whose wounds testified to the ferocity of the assault. Domingo described how the Apache began looting the wagons after the initial attack. The surviving Mexicans had scattered, desperately seeking routes back to Camp Grant. Some fled via Apache Springs, taking the easier path. This choice concerned Domingo, who feared Apache warriors might pursue those taking the longer route. "They know these mountains better than we ever will," he warned. "Those who took the longer paths may still be in danger." The military response at Camp Grant unfolded with remarkable speed. When Domingo stumbled upon Sergeants Warfield and Mott, the veteran non-commissioned officers reacted with the decisiveness that frontier conditions demanded. Without waiting for formal orders, they immediately gathered the horse herd and prepared saddles and equipment. Their actions reflected years of experience in a territory where hesitation often meant death. Every soldier capable of riding was mobilized. The camp transformed into a flurry of purposeful activity as men checked weapons, filled canteens, and secured ammunition. In less than 20 minutes, the 1st Cavalry Unit crossed the San Pedro River and entered Santa Catalina Canyon. This rapid deployment stood in stark contrast to the military's typical bureaucratic pace, revealing how frontier conditions had reshaped military protocols. The rescue party departed inadequately equipped for an extended campaign. They lacked sufficient water and hardtack rations, prioritizing speed over comprehensive preparation. The calculation made by the officers balanced the risk of soldier hardship against the immediate danger to civilians. Colonel Dubois, upon receiving full details of the situation, formally authorized the rapid response that was already underway. His subsequent order organized a 2nd detachment to follow with supply wagons carrying water, provisions, medical supplies, and bedding. This 2-phase approach had evolved through bitter experience with Apache raids, where conventional military formations proved too cumbersome to be effective. As the 1st rescue party pushed deeper into Santa Catalina Canyon, the soldiers understood the grim arithmetic of frontier violence. Each minute that passed decreased the likelihood of finding survivors. The Apache's tactical approach typically involved quick strikes followed by rapid dispersal into terrain where pursuing soldiers were at a distinct disadvantage. The response to Domingo's news illustrated the practical adaptations that had developed at frontier outposts like Camp Grant. These men had learned that standard military doctrine, developed for conventional European warfare, failed in the face of Apache guerrilla tactics. The small, fast-moving cavalry unit represented the military's reluctant acknowledgement that Apache warfare required different approaches than those taught at Eastern military academies. The soldiers riding toward Canyon del Oro carried with them not just weapons, but the weight of a territorial conflict that had already claimed countless lives on all sides. They rode into terrain that favored their adversaries, guided only by Domingo's account and their own frontier experience. Whether this would be sufficient to save any survivors remained to be seen. Marching to the massacre site, the cavalry unit pushed through Santa Catalina Canyon with grim determination. The 12-mile stretch of canyon presented a formidable obstacle with its deep, shifting sand that drained both horses and riders. Whenever they encountered patches of harder ground, the soldiers urged their mounts to greater speed, acutely aware that lives might depend on their swift arrival. Santa Catalina Canyon rose around them with towering rock walls that amplified the heat. Giant saguaro cacti stood like silent sentinels along the route. The soldiers passed clusters of prickly pear and beryl cacti that thrived in this harsh environment. Despite the summer heat, patches of wildflowers still clung to life in shaded areas, remnants of a spring that had briefly transformed the desert. "Look there," called one of the scouts, pointing to a saguaro, where an Apache arrow protruded from the fleshy trunk. The arrow's presence was an ominous sign, either a marker for other Apache or evidence of recent hunting in the area. The soldiers rode past without stopping, but the arrow served as a stark reminder that they were entering territory where Apache warriors moved with confidence and skill. The cavalry unit maintained a punishing pace. Horses stumbled in the sand, and men swayed in their saddles from exhaustion, but no one suggested slowing down. Their singular focus remained reaching the ambush site before nightfall. This urgency stemmed from hard-learned frontier knowledge. Tracking became nearly impossible after dark, especially against adversaries as skilled in night movement as the Apache. The canyon route revealed why Apache warfare had confounded military strategists. The narrow passages created perfect ambush points, while the difficult terrain favored those who knew it intimately. The soldiers scanned the high walls constantly, aware that a few well-positioned warriors could decimate their column from above. The U.S. Army had spent years trying to apply conventional tactics in this unconventional landscape, often with disastrous results. As the canyon widened and the cavalry approached Canyon del Oro, the men reorganized their formation. The light was fading, creating long shadows that complicated visibility. They approached the long mesa where Domingo had indicated the ambush occurred, moving with increased caution. Sergeants Warfield and Mott spread the men into a more defensive formation, ready for potential engagement. The mesa loomed ahead, its flat top silhouetted against the darkening sky. The soldiers' expressions hardened as they prepared themselves for what they might find. Veterans of similar incidents exchanged knowing glances. They had seen the aftermath of Apache raids before. The newer recruits maintained tense silence, gripping their rifles with white-knuckled determination. The cavalry unit's approach to the ambush site reflected years of painful adaptation. Early military expeditions against the Apache had failed spectacularly, with commanders learning that traditional column formations and fixed battle lines were useless against enemies who refused to fight on such terms. By this period, frontier cavalry had developed more flexible tactics, though still at a disadvantage, against Apache mobility and environmental knowledge. As they neared the mesa, the soldiers spread out further, approaching from multiple angles to minimize vulnerability. This tactic had evolved through experience rather than formal training. Most of these men had learned frontier warfare through direct experience, not military academy instruction. The silence that greeted them seemed unnatural after their long, urgent ride. No gunfire, no calls for help, no movement on the horizon. The absence of sound carried its own message, one that experienced frontier soldiers understood all too well. As they prepared to ascend to the mesa top, the men steeled themselves for what they would discover, knowing that the scene ahead would likely join the catalog of frontier violence that defined this contested territory. Horrific scene and painful truth. The cavalry unit reached the mesa top and found an eerie stillness. No enemy warriors remained, no gunfire echoed across the landscape. The soldiers immediately deployed in search formation, fanning out to locate survivors or recover bodies. The absence of any signs of life cast a somber mood over the men as they methodically swept the area. Only the natural sounds of the desert broke the silence. Wolves howling in the distance, quail calling from brush patches, and ravens circling overhead. These scavengers had already detected the aftermath of violence, their presence a grim indicator of what the soldiers would find. A strange cry caught the attention of two scouts. They paused, listening intently, unable to determine if the sound came from human or animal. Following the direction of the noise, They discovered Kennedy lying in a small creek bed near the trail. Despite severe injuries, he remained conscious, his eyes alert with recognition when the soldiers approached. "Took you boys long enough," Kennedy managed weakly as they knelt beside him. Kennedy's account confirmed Domingo's initial report while adding crucial details. He explained that when most of the caravan retreated with the women and children, more than 30 people in total, the Apache launched their main assault against the smaller group that stayed behind as protection. "We gave them hell," Kennedy insisted, grimacing through pain. "They lost at least 6 warriors. I know where the body of the one who killed Israel is. Israel got him with his last shot right through the chest." Kennedy described continuing to fight despite losing his thumb to an arrow. When the Mexicans beside him fell, he used his knife to cut the harness of the nearest mule, leaped onto its back, and charged directly through the Apache attackers. The sheer audacity of his action caused several Apache to miss their shots, though 2 arrows found their mark, one striking Kennedy and another hitting the mule. "The animal went crazy," Kennedy explained. "Threw me right into a mess of cactus and mesquite. He had crawled to the creek bed where they found him, expecting to die alone. The Apache had not pursued him, Kennedy believed, because they were preoccupied with looting the wagons. They went straight for the goods," he said. "That's what they wanted more than scalps." A small detachment remained to care for Kennedy, while the rest of the cavalry continued forward. What they discovered was a scene of devastation that even hardened frontier veterans found disturbing. The new wagons had been reduced to smoldering ruins. Broken crates, spent cartridges, arrows, broken bows, shattered guns, and burned, torn clothing littered the ground in chaotic disarray. Israel's naked body lay exposed to the elements. A piece of his scalp had been removed, but unusually placed back on the corpse, a detail that puzzled the soldiers, who knew Apache rarely concerned themselves with scalp-taking. More disturbing was the cavity in his chest, where his heart had been removed. This practice carried specific cultural significance among certain Apache groups, though its exact meaning remained debated among those who studied tribal customs. Israel's body bore multiple wounds from spears and arrows, a bruise beneath one eye, and a fatal wound that stretched from ear to ear. The soldiers recognized the significance of these specific injury patterns, which indicated he had been singled out for special attention during the attack. One sergeant identified Israel as a tough frontiersman of the kind we don't see much anymore, his words capturing the sense that an era was passing. The attack pattern revealed much about Apache tactical approaches. Rather than seeking to maximize casualties, they had focused on resource acquisition while neutralizing the most significant threats. This pragmatic approach to warfare differed markedly from European military traditions that emphasized battlefield dominance and enemy casualties as primary objectives. The Apache's strategic focus on supplies, rather than pursuit of fleeing survivors, reflected their practical understanding of desert survival needs. The soldiers gathered what information they could from the scene, noting details that might help track the attackers. Boot prints, moccasin tracks, blood trails, and abandoned items all told parts of the story. The cavalrymen moved with practiced efficiency, having performed similar grim duties too many times before. Their faces remained impassive, but the tension in their movements betrayed the emotional impact of the scene. As they prepared to transport Kennedy and recover Israel's body, the soldiers confronted the reality that this attack, while shocking, was merely one incident in a larger pattern of violence that defined the territory. The tactical details, ambush location, timing, focus on wagons rather than pursuit, all pointed to experienced warriors who understood both their own needs and their opponent's vulnerabilities with devastating clarity. Fateful night and Kennedy's passing. As darkness fell over the mesa, the soldiers moved Kennedy to a more protected position. Despite his grave injuries, his spirit remained remarkably strong. The men attempted to comfort him, suggesting his wounds might only be from buckshot rather than arrows, hoping to maintain his morale. Kennedy wasn't fooled. "No, boys," he said sadly, shaking his head with effort. "I'm done for. I know it was an arrow because I broke off the feathered end myself. I'm not long for this world." His matter-of-fact acceptance of his fate reflected the frontier pragmatism that had defined his life. The soldiers established a perimeter with guards posted at regular intervals. The entire unit maintained vigilant silence throughout the night, listening for any sound that might indicate the return of Apache warriors. Veterans quietly reminded newer recruits of the old frontier wisdom. Apache don't attack at night unless they have overwhelming advantage, but they'll move at night to set up a dawn attack. Above them, the desert sky displayed a brilliant canopy of stars, their cold light illuminating the landscape in silver-blue tones. The beauty stood in stark contrast to the violence that had unfolded beneath the same sky hours earlier. Several soldiers noted how the frontier constantly juxtaposed sublime natural beauty with brutal human conflict. The night watch rotation continued without incident. The men moved with practiced efficiency, minimizing noise and light that might reveal their position. This nighttime discipline had evolved through generations of frontier conflict, with each mistake teaching lessons paid for in blood. Near midnight, the supply wagons arrived with reinforcements. They brought fresh water, medical supplies, and orders from Colonel Du Bois. Return to the fort once the horses had rested, then prepare for immediate pursuit of the Apache raiders. The colonel's instructions reflected standard military procedure: recover and regroup before launching a coordinated response. The supply team also brought intelligence gathered from scouts. Apache tracks indicated they had crossed the Santa Catalina Range and were heading toward the rugged mountains near the upper Aravaipa Creek. This information shaped the coming pursuit strategy, though experienced soldiers recognized the challenges it presented. The Aravaipa region represented some of the most difficult terrain in the territory, a maze of canyons, hidden water sources, and natural fortifications known intimately by the Apache but mapped only vaguely by the military. The Apache selection of this escape route demonstrated their tactical sophistication. They had chosen ground that neutralized the military's advantages in numbers and firepower while maximizing their own mobility and environmental knowledge. Kennedy's condition deteriorated while the camp surgeon examined him by lantern light. The doctor's grim expression confirmed what Kennedy himself had already accepted. The arrow fragment had penetrated his lung, and internal bleeding was steadily draining his strength. The surgeon administered morphine to ease Kennedy's pain, the only meaningful intervention possible under the circumstances. Between consciousness and delirium, Kennedy drifted throughout the night. During lucid moments, he provided additional details about the attack that helped the officers plan their pursuit. His first-hand knowledge of Apache tactics proved valuable even as his life ebbed away. "They'll separate into smaller groups," Kennedy warned during one clear moment. "Follow the heaviest trail, and you'll find nothing but false camps and cold fires." Dawn's first hint appeared on the horizon as soldiers prepared for departure. They would transport Kennedy and Israel's body back to Camp Grant, then immediately organize a pursuit force. The officers conferred over maps, plotting likely routes and discussing water sources. A sergeant who had served in the territory for over a decade summarized the situation to a group of newer recruits. "The Apache fight differently than any enemy you've trained for. They don't want to stand and fight. They hit, take what they need, and disappear. Our job isn't to win battles, but to make their way of life impossible until they surrender." The Apache raids weren't primarily about killing settlers, but about resource acquisition and territorial control. The military response similarly focused less on battlefield victory and more on disrupting Apache ability to maintain their traditional lifeways. This reality transformed the coming pursuit from a simple revenge mission, hasty funeral and pursuit preparations. The morning after returning to the ambush site, Lieutenant George Bacon discovered the body of the Apache warrior who had killed Israel. The corpse lay on a rocky outcropping near where Israel had fallen. The soldiers left the body undisturbed, noting that wolves and vultures had already begun to gather. This decision reflected practical frontier considerations rather than respect for enemy dead. Disturbing the body might alert Othair Apache to the cavalry's presence in the area. The tracking specialists among the soldiers made a significant discovery about the Apache raiders. Footprints showed erratic movement patterns suggesting some warriors had consumed patent medicine from the wagons, mistaking it for whiskey. Several tracks revealed staggering gaits and falls into brush. One scout pointed out where a warrior had apparently become disoriented and walked in circles before rejoining the main group. This medicine contained mostly alcohol and opium, explained the company medic. They wouldn't know the dosage. Some might be severely impaired for days. This accidental intoxication created a tactical advantage for the pursuing cavalry. The Apache typically maintained strict sobriety during raids to ensure clear thinking and quick reactions. Their mistake provided a rare opportunity for the military to potentially catch up to a slowed, disorganized group. The journey down Canyon del Oro and preparation of morning coffee took about an hour. During this time, Kennedy's condition deteriorated rapidly. He became agitated, irritable, and increasingly desperate as his breathing grew more labored. The soldiers tried to make him comfortable on the ambulance wagon, but every jolt over the rough terrain caused him visible pain. "Let me lie flat," Kennedy requested, on a wagon bed. Unfortunately, the only available flat wagon carried Israel's body. Despite their efforts to shield the corpse and create a comfortable space for Kennedy, he inadvertently touched Israel's cold form when transferred. A soft moan was the only indication that Kennedy recognized his unintended companion. The frontier often forced such macabre arrangements, where pragmatism necessarily overruled sentiment. Kennedy survived the journey back to Camp Grant, but died in the post-hospital before midnight. The post-mortem examination revealed a broken arrow fragment, approximately 4 to 5 inches long, embedded in his left lung. The military surgeon noted that Kennedy had survived remarkably long with such a severe injury, attributing this to his frontier toughness and determination. The funeral proceedings moved with frontier efficiency. Wood shortages meant no proper coffins could be constructed, so the men used whatever materials were available. Some bodies were simply wrapped in blankets. The entire garrison attended the brief ceremony, standing at attention as the chaplain offered concise prayers. Each man tossed a handful of earth onto the graves before covering them with rocks and cactus to prevent wolves from digging up the remains. Lieutenant Howard B. Cushing received orders to lead the pursuit of the Apache raiders. Cushing had earned a reputation as one of the most effective officers in conflicts with native tribes. His previous successes in tracking and engaging Apache bands made him the natural choice for this mission. Cushing's motivation ran deeper than military duty. Lieutenant Yeaton, a close friend, had been wounded in a previous Apache encounter and later died from his injuries. This personal loss fueled Cushing's determination to bring the raiders to justice. Physically, Cushing cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick mustache and penetrating gaze. His temperament combined methodical planning with decisive action. Soldiers respected his judgment and willingly followed his orders, knowing he wouldn't waste their efforts on futile pursuits. A narrow passage in Tucson would later bear his name, though his grave would eventually fall into disrepair, a common fate for frontier military figures, whose contributions faded from public memory as the territory developed. Unlike less experienced officers who might have launched an immediate pursuit, Cushing deliberately delayed. He understood Apache tactics well enough to know they would expect immediate retaliation and would remain vigilant for several days. By waiting, he increased the likelihood they would relax their guard, making them more vulnerable to surprise. Cushing supervised meticulous preparations. Horseshoes were checked and extras packed. Food supplies were calculated for extended field operations. Ammunition was distributed according to each soldier's role in the coming engagement. These preparations reflected Cushing's understanding that Apache pursuit required self-sufficient units capable of operating independently for extended periods. Guides Felmer and Manuel Duran carefully evaluated information gathered from Mexican survivors. They cross-referenced reported sightings with known Apache movement patterns and water sources. This integration of formal military intelligence with indigenous knowledge represented a tactical evolution that improved the cavalry's effectiveness against Apache raiders. The Mexican community's reaction to the tragedy revealed the complex social dynamics of the territory. Some demanded immediate vengeance, while others withdrew from frontier settlements entirely, recognizing the increased danger. Mexican trackers offered their services to the military, bringing valuable skills and local knowledge that formal military training couldn't provide. Preparations continued steadily, while Cushing gathered his officers for final instructions. "We're not just chasing raiders," he explained. "We're sending a message that no attack goes unanswered, no matter how far they run." The pursuit and final battle. Cushing's pursuit force navigated the distinctive terrain of Arizona, following the Aravaipa Creek through its winding canyon. The landscape presented a formidable challenge: steep canyon walls, unpredictable water levels, and dense vegetation along the banks that could conceal ambushes. This environment had shaped Apache warfare tactics for generations, creating warriors who used the land itself as both weapon and shield. Near the Aravaipa Canyon, the Apache tracks suddenly disappeared, with signs pointing toward San Carlos. Many trackers would have followed this obvious trail, but Manuel Duran merely smiled. "This is an old trick," Manuel explained to Cushing. "They want us to waste time heading east while they move west." Drawing on his Apache upbringing, Manuel easily relocated the true trail. The footprints revealed that the raiders had turned westward toward the headwaters of Deer Creek and Rock Creek. This tactical insight demonstrated the critical advantage that cultural insiders like Manuel provided to military operations. Without his knowledge, the cavalry would have followed false leads for days, while the Apache escaped. The pursuit stretched across punishing terrain, steep mountains, dry washes that suddenly flooded with afternoon thunderstorms, and rocky plateaus where horses struggled for footing. The Apache deliberately chose difficult routes, forcing their pursuers to exhaust supplies and energy. They crossed stream beds at rocky points to hide tracks and occasionally split into smaller groups before reuniting miles later. They circle back, cross their own trail, walk backward, in their own footsteps, one frustrated soldier complained. "That's why we follow water, not footprints." Manuel replied, "In this country, everyone must drink." From the summit of Pinal Mountain, scouts spotted smoke rising from locations to the north and east. Cushing studied these signals through field glasses, calculating distances and possible camp locations. The smoke patterns suggested multiple groups had converged, a rarity that indicated something significant. Further investigation uncovered evidence that women and children carrying harvested mescal had joined the raiding party. This development changed the tactical situation considerably. The presence of non-combatants suggested the Apache felt secure enough to gather food resources rather than focusing solely on evasion. Cushing wanted to attack immediately. "We've got them," he insisted. "They don't know we're this close." Manuel urged caution. "Wait until night," he counseled. "They will relax. The women and children will sleep. The warriors will drink more of the medicine they took." Cushing reluctantly agreed, recognizing the value of Manuel's experience. Manuel volunteered to scout the enemy position alone, slipping away with only a knife and pistol. He returned 3 hours later with detailed information about the Apache camp, its layout, the number of warriors, and their weapons. 15, maybe 20 fighters, he reported. Many are still affected by the medicine. The rest are celebrating their raid with the mescal women. The soldiers moved into position under cover of darkness. The night turned cold, with a clear sky that offered minimal concealment but excellent visibility. Cushing positioned his men to cover all escape routes, planning to attack just before dawn, when sleep would be deepest. An unexpected event triggered the engagement earlier than planned. An elderly man from the mescal gathering group rose to stoke the dying fire. The sudden flames illuminated Cushing's position on a nearby ridge. The old man spotted the reflection of light on a rifle barrel and shouted a warning that echoed through the canyon. "Attack now!" Cushing ordered, recognizing their advantage was disappearing by the second. The soldiers opened fire simultaneously. The Apache camp erupted in chaos as warriors scrambled for weapons and cover. Women grabbed children and ran toward pre-established escape routes, but Cushing had anticipated this response. Soldiers positioned at these exits intercepted many fleeing Apache. The warriors fought fiercely despite their disadvantage. Several managed to reach defensive positions behind rocks and began returning fire. The battle's outcome remained uncertain until Manuel Duran made a decisive move. He circled behind a boulder sheltering a powerful warrior who was directing the Apache resistance. In a single moment, Manuel fired twice, killing both the warrior and a young boy the man had been trying to shield. Within minutes, the fighting ended. The Apache suffered heavy casualties, while the military sustained only minor injuries. Survivors surrendered when they realized escape was impossible. The soldiers gathered weapons, supplies, and prisoners, securing the area against potential counterattacks. The captive women and children revealed crucial information during questioning. They identified themselves as Pinals, who had recently returned from a raid into Sonora before attacking Kennedy and Israel's wagon train. Their most accomplished warriors had participated in the ambush, but all had been compromised by the patent medicine they had consumed, believing it to be whiskey. "We thought constant movement would break our trail," one woman explained through an interpreter. "We did not know you had Apache eyes with you." This statement revealed a critical miscalculation. The Apache had counted on the military's limited tracking abilities and conventional approach to pursuit. They hadn't anticipated that the cavalry would employ cultural insiders like Manuel, who understood both Apache tactics and the landscape intimately. The battle's aftermath demonstrated how warfare in the territory had evolved. Both sides had adapted to each other's tactics, the Apache developing sophisticated evasion techniques, while the military incorporated indigenous knowledge into their operations. This tactical evolution reflected the broader pattern of cultural exchange and conflict that defined the Arizona Territory during this period. Cushing organized the return to Camp Grant with prisoners and recovered property. The successful pursuit and engagement enhanced his already formidable reputation. More significantly, it sent a message throughout the territory that Apache raids would face swift and effective response, regardless of the challenges involved. The story of Kennedy and Israel's wagon train ambush and its aftermath became part of territorial lore, a tale that captured both the brutality of frontier conflict and the complex interplay of cultures that characterized the American Southwest. The incident highlighted how conventional military forces struggled against indigenous guerrilla tactics until they adopted elements of their opponent's approach, creating a hybrid form of warfare unique to this time and place. For the Apache, the defeat represented another step in the gradual erosion of their traditional way of life. Each lost warrior and each successful pursuit further constrained their ability to maintain independence. The battle illustrated how even successful raids often led to devastating counterattacks, creating a cycle of violence that would eventually force most Apache bands to surrender to reservation life.